The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame.
Welcome back to The Short Game, the show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I am joined this week by one spooky co-host,
Nate Heininger.
And this week, we are doing our annual, in quotes, horror game for the spooky season.
Yeah.
We're talking about Devotion from developer Red Candle Games.
Reagan, I've got my pumpkin beer here. I've spent a good majority of my day today playing this game. I am spooked out of my mind, but before we go any further, something has happened in between the last record and this record. Reagan, happy birthday. Shane's not on the call.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to Shane. I just got to get the fun stuff out of the way before we descend into the fucked up game that we just played. Before
we descend into the basement full of wine and snake blood.
This was awful. And it's a good game. I'll get that out. This was awful.
It's a distressing game.
Yes.
It is a very,
I'm not even going to say it was a good game. This was not fun.
I'm sorry, Nate. No, you're right. It's not fun, but there is a difference between fun and good. I think it's a really, really good game, but we can talk about the specifics there.
I need to set. I'm going to set two things up real quick before I talk about my feelings about this game, because this is a good game, and I'm glad that it exists and I played it. But I'm not a horror fan, and I'm not like point and click, like walking around adventure games. So this was like a perfect Venn diagram of like things that I don't generally like.
Yeah. Also, you had some technical trouble.
And that's not the game's fault, so I'm not going to harp on that. That was more me running it. It's a very beautiful game, and you can tell they put a lot of work into the design. But like this game is like a Venn diagram of things that I should not have liked, and ultimately, I've got generally good things to say about it. So I'm glad that we played it. It's a very interesting game, and I never want to play it again. But I'm glad that we did for this show. So why don't you set it up? It's got an interesting history. It's an interesting game. Why don't you set it up a little bit?
Yeah. So we've mentioned on the show before that we always shoot for trying to do a horror game in the month of October, as close to Halloween as possible, and that almost never lines up for a variety of reasons. We end up doing our horror games in like June, but this year I've really been wanting to play this specific game. Devotion is a game from, I mentioned earlier, Red Candle Games. They're a Taiwanese indie video game developer. It's a team of about 12 developers, I believe, or 12 people. And this is a first-person, they call it an atmospheric horror game. So it's very much inspired by, quote-unquote, walking simulator style games, things like PT. PT, I think, is a big influence here. What Remains of Edith. They specifically called out What Remains of Edith Finch and Layers of Fear. So first-person horror storytelling stuff. This is very much story first. It's not like a survival horror game. You're very rarely... there's only really one sequence in which you're in any actual peril. It's mostly about exploring a space. So this is a game that's set in 1980s Taiwan. It centers around this family of three: a father, Du Feng Yu, and who's a script writer, screenwriter. His wife, Li Feng, who is a movie star and singer who has retired from the business in order to become a wife and mother. And their very sweet little daughter, Mei Xin. And they live together in this fairly small apartment in Taipei. And so you are exploring in the sort of PT style. This game is very restricted in terms of space. It's almost entirely happening in this one 1980s apartment. but it has this sort of it feels much larger than that because you have scenes that take place outside of the apartment in terms of like, you know, hallways, but also sort of alternate or horror inflected bizarre spaces, as well as taking place across time. So this game is set between 1980 and 1986, and you see basically 3 versions of the apartment across those years. So it's sort of gradual. It's a space that's gradually shifting into, you know, into hell, into a nightmare.
Well, and it also has an element of like very light puzzling where you are picking up item A to put it into slot B, and slot B might be right around the corner. It might be in another time. And that's what a lot of the main gameplay loop is, looking for these items, interacting with things, and moving them around. And that's the stuff that I generally don't really like in games. And you mentioned like Edith Finch is one of my favorite games that we've covered on the show.
Yeah, or I was very much reminded of Gone Home. Like this feels like a significantly more horror inflected Gone Home.
And Gone Home doesn't have these little like micro puzzles and these like pick things up, put them back down, pick things up, put them back. You know, that's almost strictly exploration. And while I said I don't normally like that like gameplay mechanic, because this game existed, or the whole thing takes place in such a small space, I actually found myself enjoying it. I thought that was like a good use of the space. It was, you were never too far away from where, you know, slot B should have been, and like it wouldn't take too long to find that spot, and it was usually pretty obvious. So I thought it actually did a good job of forcing you to move around and explore these places.
And talking a little bit about the development of this game, because this sort of development story and release story of this game is very fraught and interesting. So this was from this team, Red Candle Games. This is their second game. Their first game was a huge success. It was called Detention, and it was a 2017 game. It's actually 2D, not 3D. Oh, there's actually a 2D section in this game that kind of echoes back to Detention. But Detention was this extremely well-regarded 2017 horror game that I think is set. I have not played that one yet. It's set in a school, I believe, and it's also in Taiwan, but it's in the 1960s during what's called the White Terror period, which is a very troubled and scary period in the political and social history of Taiwan. It was a very popular game. It's out on everything. It's on Nintendo Switch, for example. Like it was released on a bunch of consoles and things. And it was popular enough to get a movie adaptation in 2019. So it's a pretty well regarded game. This game was their second game. This was their move into 3D. The team had to learn Unity 3D to create this game. And their goals were kind of different. So the first game, Detention, was very political. It's about this horrifying period in the political history of Taiwan. This game is more about religious fanaticism and the sort of way that a family. So it's about this family falling apart for a bunch of reasons, but in very large part due to the. So I without getting into spoilers, we are going to have a big spoiler break on this. But I think it's pretty obvious this game is a game about a family falling apart. If you look at anything related to the game, and they're falling apart for a variety of reasons, including health and mental health and religious fanaticism. And it's a really interesting sort of picture into Taiwanese culture. That's an explicit goal of the game. The developers really wanted. They said that they wanted to introduce players, domestic and foreign players, to Taiwanese culture. They wanted to have a setting that would feel familiar to Taiwanese players, but that would have something that could bring in players from Red Candle's probably biggest market is mainland China, but of course they had a player base all over the world because of the success of their previous game. One of the things that one of their developers said in an interview last year was, from the very beginning, one of our goals was to attract foreign players to experience our games, and our attempt to achieve that was to combine both Taiwanese elements and horror, making the game scary, by utilizing people's fear towards unknown culture and objects, we figured it may help our contents stand out from other games on the market. And I think they were very, very successful at that. Like the game has this, because, coming from a like a white person in America perspective, and not knowing a ton about Taiwanese culture, it felt very, it did have a sort of foreign scariness to me, because of course it's relying on all this like horror imagery, but also it had this sort of like really feels like a real cultural place and space, they did such a careful and loving job of sort of recreating authentic Taiwanese 80s spaces that one of the things I saw when I was doing some research about this game was that there was, in the few weeks after the game's release, there was a meme on the Taiwanese internet where folks were posting photos of the game side by side with photos of their grandparents' apartments.
Nice.
And I looked at some of these tweets and stuff, and I could tell you, like, identical. Like this was the floor that that you'd find in 80s Taiwanese apartments. The door, the sculptures.
Yeah, we also had a spooky clock.
My grandma had this horrible bathroom.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. The tiling in the bathroom is wild. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think also the game takes place in the 80s, so I would be interested to see like what elements of that Taiwanese culture still exist. There's some heavy hitting pieces around things like gender roles and family dynamics that like also feel like they existed in America as well. And different cultures and subcultures are still dealing with that. I thought that was a really interesting element of the game as well.
Yeah, and then the spaces are just like chock full of stuff. There are, objects that you can pick up that are part of puzzles, and a lot of things will give you like, if it's a pick upable item, or certain things like posters on walls, you can sometimes get a English translation. But there's a ton of documents and papers on desks, things on walls, wall calendars, family photo albums. There's a lot of writing in this game that obviously I couldn't read. So I kind of got the feeling that like this would be like walking through the house in Gone Home, or more like that if you were able to read the text. But it does give you translations of like a lot of the important stuff.
I really wish that I was able to read everything that was on the walls and on the desks. I think I had the same thought about Gone Home. Also, what I thought was really cool is that there is like video like in the game of, there's a TV set and it is playing TV shows, and they have that distinctly, of the time vibe, and
the developers had to hire actors and film that stuff.
It's real. It's real footage on a TV that is, in a 3D rendered space. It was actually a pretty shocking, balance that I thought like added to this overall creepy vibe of the game. There's a lot of, besides the TV, there's like photos and things that are just real photos, that look really good, and the game looks so good that there's a little bit of like an uncanny valley of element to it that I think just adds to the whole vibe of creepiness.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of controversy around the release of this game, which is not a small part of why I played it. When this game first came out, it came out in 2019. It came out. Oh, what was the date? I had it here, but I don't seem to anymore. But it was around February of 2019, and it got incredibly good reviews. It was from a developer that people liked from their previous work, and so this got reviewed in a lot of mainstream publications all over the world. I remember reading an article about it by I think it was Danielle Riendeau over at, I think it might have been Vice at the time that I was like, wow, this sounds amazing. And I may be misremembering that, but in looking up stuff about this game, I went back and reread some of those contemporary reviews from 2019 when the game first came out, and they're all glowing, lots of 9.5s out of 10 and that kind of thing. People really, really liked this game, and I immediately thought, this sounds like it's going to be for the show, right? So I was excited to play it, but I missed my shot because very shortly after, like less than or about 2 weeks after the release of the game, and here, by the way, I want to put forward that I am by no means an expert on Taiwan or China or cross-strait relations, and I'm also, I'm doing my best to represent this accurately and fairly based on what I've read about it. If anybody has any feelings about anything that I say, I'm absolutely willing to listen. Here's what I take from what I have read about this truly unprecedented and bizarre situation around the release of this game. So, extremely well-received game. Gets great reviews, does well all over the world, has a big audience in China and in Taiwan, and in America, people are playing this game. It's doing well on Steam, overwhelmingly positive reviews in the Steam reviews. And at some point, about 2 weeks after release, players discover a art asset in the game. This game is full of these religious talismans, these sort of paper talismans that have these like Chinese characters and little like line drawing illustrations on them. And they discover one of these talismans in the game somewhere that has a reference to the Xi Jinping Winnie the Pooh meme. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, a few years ago, there was a meme on the Chinese internet that has since bled out onto the American internet. So it's something I was familiar with as well. Comparing Xi Jinping, who's a high-ranking Communist Party official. I forget he's a general secretary at the time, at least. Comparing him to Winnie the Pooh, basically saying he's a fat, pudgy little man, which is like the most like light meme ever, right? Like, but in China, this is deadly serious. This is so, if you were not aware, this is something that the Chinese Communist Party took absolutely extreme exception to. All sorts of fallout happened from this meme. If you type, Winnie the Pooh into anything on the Chinese internet, somebody's going to show up on your door. They've done things like prevent the Christopher Robin movie and any other Pooh-related movies from coming out in China since.
It's a great example of the Streisand effect, by the way.
It really is.
They've only made it
that's
worse.
The thing. The Streisand effect, I don't think exists in China, man. Like the Chinese, like China has a really good way of erasing things from the internet. And so there's this reference to this meme in the game. And so Chinese players begin review bombing the game on Steam. So at least at this point, I don't believe this is an actual coordinated effort by the Chinese Communist Party. Instead, this is a bunch of Chinese gamers who are offended, or at least say they are offended, by the meme and references to the meme, and review bomb the game on Steam. So it tanks their review scores on Steam. Then we don't know what happens behind the scenes, but the fact is that the game, their publishers were Chinese companies. So presumably the Chinese government begins putting pressure on their publisher. So on the 23rd of February, they take the game down off of Steam in China. 2 days later, they take it down off of Steam worldwide and say that they are going to be reviewing the contents of the game. They say that this element that was in the game was there by accident. It was a placeholder asset. They don't say where from, but they say, hey, this wasn't actually meant to be in the game. We're very sorry. It was not intentional. And they take the game down from all stores worldwide, saying they're going to review all of the assets in the game to make sure that nothing else offensive remains in the game.
It's wild.
Let's see, July 2019, so months later, without announcing why, China revoked the business license from IndieVent, their publisher, which is the Chinese company that was their publisher. Revoked their business license, which means that company went out of business over this. And Red Candle, at the same time, released an apology letter saying that they did not plan to release the game again, ever. So, you know, this was at the time I was following the story really closely because I really wanted to play this game. I'd missed my opportunity to buy it on Steam. At this point, my only option if I wanted to play this game was to pirate it, which I looked around and found options if I wanted to do that. But the fact was, like, I really wanted to play it for the show. And the reason that we didn't cover it during that intervening period was, like, I'm not going to come on the show and say, hey, we're covering this game that you can only find by going on shady torrent sites and downloading it.
That's what retro game podcasts do, not us.
Right. No, I didn't feel right about, like, first of all, I didn't feel right about, you know, telling people to go pirate the game when I did think that the developers deserve support and were clearly, like, suffering essentially. But I also didn't feel like it really made sense to spend a lot of time doing an episode on a game that people couldn't play without putting in a lot of weird effort. Right.
Right. So, question for you before you get too much further. Was the reference to Winnie the Pooh actually that, or was it like you could interpret it as a reference to the Winnie the Pooh meme? Do you know?
So from what I understand, it was a single art asset. It was like one of these little talismans that you saw a bunch of in the game. And it had 4 Chinese characters on the edges of it. And they did say Xi Jinping Winnie the Pooh.
Okay,
or at least that's what I read. I don't read Chinese, obviously, so I can't look at the thing and tell you this for sure. But from what I understand, it was there on the piece.
That's pretty direct, though.
Xi Jinping, Winnie the Pooh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I mean, my personal perspective would be big fucking whoop. That's, no big deal. And anybody getting offended, quote unquote, by that, or I don't know what, like, simping for their Chinese Communist Party in order to, like, I don't.
Reagan, I've always wanted to become an enemy of the CCP, and on the books enemy of the state of CCP. And I think this episode is our best shot. So you dig in, keep going on your opinion.
Look, I personally do not have anything specifically against China as a country, Chinese people. Sure. I'm very skeptical, specifically around issues of free speech, of the entire free speech side of things in China. And you just have to look at the way they run their internet over there and say, like, this is a problem. Maybe there's many wonderful things about Chinese communism. Maybe there are. I wouldn't know. I don't live there. But I can look at this situation and say this is fucked up.
Yes, agree, 100%.
So, anyway, the reason that we're covering this game today is that over the couple of years since its release, there have been a couple of efforts to get this game available again. The most notable that I thought was really interesting from a like business standpoint was that in December of 2020, last year, Red Candle and GOG, good old games, the game publisher or site that is owned by CD Projekt Red, announced that they would be bringing this game back to the public, and they put out tweets and they put up a store page for it on GOG, and like 5 hours or less later, GOG puts up a message on their Twitter saying that they would not be releasing this game after all, because they said, after receiving many messages from gamers, we have decided.
Oh yeah, gamers. It was gamers. Yeah.
Lots of messages from gamers.
Gamers did
so
that.
This is what I think was really like sad to me about this, was like that this game became radioactive, not because there was anything about it that would offend any reasonable person, but because
hold on. There's plenty of content in this game that would have. This game is fucked up, but not
okay.
Not in the way. Not in the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
But instead, it became a political lightning rod because all of the major platform holders have big stakes in China, and they saw what happened to IndieVent, and GOG does not want what happened to IndieVent to happen to them. They don't want to get banned from the marketplace in China. Steam
there's
operates
$1 billion.
in China. They don't want to get banned there.
It's all these companies are doing this all over the world is placating the CCP because there's a billion people and they want to be able to sell whatever it is that they're selling to all of those people.
Yeah. Finally, the reason that we're playing this game today is that in March of this year, Red Candle Games finally decided to, or found a way to, or whatever, start selling the game direct to consumer themselves on their website. And as soon as I heard this was available, I immediately went and downloaded this thing. I was like, I got to get this before something else bad happens to it. But the game has been available since March. You can go to redcandlegames.com and you can download this game. This game is available for Mac and PC. And in fact, the Mac version has come out since March. Like, they initially just released the Windows PC version. That was the initial version that got pulled. But they've updated it and released a Mac version. And you can download it direct from their website and pay them directly. And I think that you should, because I think this is a really, really good horror game. And also a really good game in the sort of like first-person narrative exploration, atmospheric kind of thing genre. If you like games like What Remains of Edith Finch or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture or Gone Home, but you want something really spooky.
I was going to say, yes, it is similar in that you are walking around first person and clicking on things. And that's about where the similarities end as far as tone and structure from those sorts of games.
Well, I would argue that structure, it's actually pretty similar to a lot of those games. But for tone, maybe so.
Yeah,
it's definitely different in tone.
Kind of. I get what you're saying. I mean, yeah, you're just walking around clicking on things until the story's done. If that's what you mean by structure, then yes, it's similar. But the storytelling arc and the storytelling devices and the way in which you process or proceed through the story is not at all the same. Those games are linear.
I don't know.
This game is...
Yeah, but I think think about What Remains of Edith Finch. I think it shares a lot with that one in particular. This is a game that has it begins with the sort of just like explore this 5-room apartment and try to glean what you can from the space. But as it begins layering things on, first it starts by giving you these puzzles to interact with, and the puzzles, like Nate explained, like really are limited to like find an object that is in one room and, put it in a different place in another room in ways that kind of make sense. You find a record in one place, take it and play it on a record player in another room, that kind of thing. Yeah, and
they make it even easier too, because I think like 99% of interactable items are directly useful and are like tied to the puzzle. Like if it has a little icon over it, they do like a little white icon. You're either going to be able to pick it up, or it's a place to put an item that you picked up from before. Now that's not exclusive. There are some times that there are items, but even if they're not pick upable or placeable, they're usually like direct guidance to the plot. So unlike a Gone Home or something like that, where you're just picking up all sorts of random stuff and looking at it and putting it back down. Like if you're picking something up here, it is directly tied to like,
it goes into an inventory.
It progresses the story.
And when you pick these items up, and you're picking up both like objects and also just papers, there's lots of documents that you can pick up and read. And so with documents, there's an interface where you can go in and read them and read translations and kind of scan back through them if you want to refresh your memory on something. And with the objects, a lot of the times there'll be little details on them that'll there'll be a note scrawled on the back of a family photo, that kind of thing. But the game usually rewards you sort of figuring one of these things out. Like, well, what am I supposed to do with this, this pair of shoes? It'll reward you for those by not every single one, but in general, like the reward for sort of figuring out these things is that something changes. Right. Yeah.
I just did the reward in air quotes because this is not... I got to get over it because this is a horror game. So the reward is awful stuff.
Awful stuff happens. Well, like things change in the room. So you are in these spaces, like you start off in the apartment in 1980, and there'll be scenes that might play out where there's audio or something. There's very few actual moving human characters in this. There's things like creepy dolls, and that mostly don't move when you're looking.
Mostly.
But when you might, let's say, bend over and to place this record onto the record player, it begins playing a haunting song, and you look around behind you, and something about the state of the room has changed. So most of the way this game is telling its story is by having creepy, uncanny things happen just out of frame. And every time that you move an object around, something changes to reflect the dark things that happened in this apartment.
It's really clever, and it's not quite a jump scare, though there are a few jump scares in this game. But I
can think of like 2 points that were like felt to me like actual jump scares. So it's not like I was worried it would be more reliant on that than it was. It's not,
and I'm glad it's not too. I'm not a fan of jump scares as like a tactic. And this game, I think I can really only think of one that is like obviously directly a jump scare, and then there's a couple times where you turn from the direction that you were looking, and like the new scene, the tableau, if you will, that's presented in front of you is so bizarre and so unsettling that it's like almost the same aspect as a jump scare, but like you chose to go and interact with it or look that way, right, rather than like a jump scare where you're doing something else and then it interrupts you with a jump scare. This is like, I knew I was turning around to look at that room, and so that it just feels different. And I think it's more unsettling. Though there is again one where you turn over and they're like right in front of you is something that is not at all what you were expecting. And I think that had a pretty similar, outcome to a jump scare. I was
scared anyway. It didn't have to be a jump scare. But yeah. The imagery, I think, is one of the things that is most effective about this from a horror perspective. Like, it is a story about like a family falling apart, both in terms of just like, interpersonal issues. For example, the wife, Li Feng, they're having money troubles because the Dufeng Yu's like screenwriting job, he's having a hard time selling a script, and so Li Feng wants to go back to work, for
as a movie star, right? And
I don't know anything about the movie industry in Taiwan in the 80s, but like, it seems like she was quite well known and famous, or, this character. And so, people are wondering like, she's dropped out of public life. She's gone to become a mother, and, when is she going to come back? So she wants to return, but like, because of, his manly pride about being the breadwinner of the family, the father doesn't want to allow that. Where was I getting to with this? It's full of this imagery that is a lot of it, I think, based in sort of Taiwanese culture. It's drawing a lot on the sort of folk religion and folk culture of Taiwan. I did a little bit of reading about this stuff because it's not an area that I was like particularly familiar with at all. And a big part of the game is the father going to a mentor, a spiritual mentor, for advice. And this mentor is something of a combination of a fortune teller and a religious leader,
mystic.
Mystic.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, who is like teaching him about a goddess, a fictional goddess. I had to look that up, but the goddess featured in this is called Sigu Guanyin. Is fictional, is created for this, but is reminiscent of a lot of sort of like folk religion figures in Taiwan. And apparently in Taiwan, it's fairly common for folks to do things like, for example, consult a fortune teller or mentor when they're doing things like making big decisions, like naming their children. They want to pick a name that will, be fortunate for their children. They might consult one of these types of figures. But this guy takes it to an extreme, and he is consulting this mentor for things about their family, about their finances. He's giving this person a lot of money, and he's consulting them about the health of their daughter Mei Xin, who's continually having all sorts of symptoms, but mostly things that sound sort of like anxiety attacks or breathing issues.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's so much to unpack here, but I think we're gonna save it for the spoiler break.
Yes, But the reason I was explaining that little bit of it is that all of the imagery, the horror imagery, kind of ties back to that as a central sort of theme. So, in the sort of faux mythology of Sigu Guanyin, there's this whole thing about snakes, and snake imagery is everywhere in this game. There's this whole there's a lot of imagery that sort of resembles the sort of Taiwanese folk art or religious folk art. There's all these sort of things like these strange mannequins that are posed in various ways around the and of course, they move when you're not looking. Creepy shit that is sort of resembles this various types of folk art. So all of the imagery, the horror imagery, ties back in various ways to either the sort of religious or religious fanaticism themes of this, or just generally to Taiwanese culture. So things like the marbles and the creepy doll all sort of have a Taiwanese flavor to them.
This one is a little later game, but this is a slight spoiler, I guess, to some of the imagery. But Reagan, I would love for you to tell me what part of Taiwanese culture explains the rope lights, where instead of lights, it's eyeballs that are just looking around.
Those were so creepy.
Yeah,
those were gross.
It was.
We'll get to talking about the ending, but like having a bunch of eyeballs around definitely ties into some stuff that's deep in spoiler territory.
I will say, and this isn't necessarily like a criticism, but like kind of over creepy dolls. You know what I mean? Like there's a creepy doll factor to this that is like all throughout it. And I was like, this creepy doll's not creeping me out. Now the mannequins, and I know it's kind of all the same thing. Like some reason the mannequins worked for me. The creepy doll, and I know it was a representation and whatnot, but like there's a lot of creepy doll.
I'm with you.
There's a lot of creepy doll work going on in this game, and I was just like, This particularly is not spooking me right now. I'm kind of like over creepy dolls being it's like movies where like the bad person has long hair that's in front of their eyes, and they're gonna like crawl across the floor at you. It's like I've seen that enough.
I've seen The Ring.
I don't need that anymore. Creepy dolls, the same thing for me. But
it is a bit of a tired trope. It's and the doll in particular, like it looks enough like famous creepy dolls like Annabelle that which obviously came much later, or I think later. I don't know. Actually, I forget when that movie first came out. But anyway, but that they're both references of a trope that is older than the hills. But you're right. Like that was probably the pretty tired imagery.
But this game is throwing
those mannequins are. Ooh.
For some reason, I know it's not that big of a difference, but it was enough of a difference where I was like, I like that and not that. But this game is throwing so much varied imagery at you. I mean, we haven't talked about it yet, but this is a 3 or 4 hour game, right? And it is changing pretty frequently. And so you're seeing a lot of different versions of spooky shit. And some of it works, some of it doesn't. I think that's going to be your mileage may vary on what spooks you. I'm not a big horror fan, so like a lot of it didn't particularly spook me, but there were some, like there's this they do a thing with the coloring of a hallway that for whatever reason, like really, I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable to walk through. And like that was a thing that I had never seen before and that I thought was really, really, really cool. And then the whole ending is a whole thing that we'll talk about later that is is a mess. But
wild representations of spiritual horror, which is the thing that you don't see in games. Really, really, really cool. So I think we're getting close to the end of what we can really talk about without talking about spoilers, because I do want to talk about some of the specific moments in this game, especially stuff that happens a little later in the game. But just to kind of before we transition out of this, I really like this game, and I think it is an absolute tragedy that this did not get to see. Like this is a game that would have been like an absolute natural to get ported to consoles and to see a wider audience, for streamers to, play this and get spooked by it on stream, that kind of thing. But it's also a really good bridge between like horror and the walking simulator genre. Like the walking simulators sometimes have this sort of horror tinge, but don't really feel like horror games. There aren't a lot of them. There are things like maybe Layers of Fear, which I haven't played yet, but like it's a natural fit. Like this is, I think, a really good one of these. And by these, I mean both of these, horror and sort of walking sim kind of thing, like a narrative exploration thing. And it tells this very domestic story. It does this great job of like taking a really mundane domestic setting and like subverting it and estranging it and making it scary. And it also like does some really interesting stuff with like editing. Like it sometimes takes you out of the first person's perspective of the main character, or puts you into the perspective of people like the daughter, Mei Shin. I think it does a really good job of telling this really tragic story with horror tropes, but ultimately it's a tragic domestic story.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm very sad this didn't see more popularity when it came out. I'm sad that it was such a tortured situation for its developers. I'm really glad to see it available now. And I mean, I don't think we're likely to see this hit any other platforms ever. Because of the political situation around.
Seems like they figured out, my guess is that they figured out like the only way we can sell this is to just sell it ourselves. Like we're not going to get shut down by the CCP because we are an independent company and we made this game.
Right.
But
and they're in Taiwan, where they have different laws and different government. And the Taiwanese government does sound like it's sort of like through a couple of statements sort of stood up for these guys. It's just that their major market, their whole business model was based around doing business in mainland China as well. And frankly, if you're releasing on any gaming platform today, that's the case, because it's a major market.
You want to sell to the millions or billion people plus that are in China. It is disappointing because, usually controversy breeds, press, right? Like, you think like, no news is bad news or whatever. Unfortunately, the controversy here is around access to the game. So it's like the one thing that really actually hinders the game. But yeah, to your point, like, like I said, like this game shouldn't have worked for me, but it did. I really did enjoy it despite some of my just like fundamental things that I don't really enjoy. I still enjoyed this game. And, and like what you were kind of just talking about, like one thing I kept thinking about while playing this game is that like the primary genre for horror is movies. And that makes sense. It's a visual and you're sitting there and it's like being presented to you. It's visuals. But like this game to me was like an example of like what video games can do that like other mediums cannot do. All the things you talk about, the switching between perspectives, the actual engagement in the game, your sort of self-discovery that you're going through at your own pace, really was a unique experience and made me like the horror genre a little bit more, even if I still am probably not gonna be a big horror fan. Like I was like, this is such a feat and such an accomplishment of that genre. That was like, horror might be best in video games. That like might be the best place to participate in horror if you're a fan of it, because of what this game accomplishes. Of course, it requires like 4+ hours of your time and a good computer to run it, which I apparently don't have. But like, I walked away saying like, this might be where horror is really going to shine, even more than movies, where it already has a major market.
Yeah, and I wish we saw more games like this, in terms of horror. It's the predominant horror mode is the sort of survival horror things like everything from Resident Evil to everything spawned like that. You don't see very much horror in this short narrative mode, even though
psychological, spiritual, no combat, no anything where you're like, other than one moment.
There's one chase sequence in this game that we'll talk about a little bit post spoiler break, and that is like the one moment where there's actual peril, where you can get a screen that says like you've died or whatever, and have to reload a checkpoint.
This game doesn't have like fear. You know what I mean? Like, you're never like, it
doesn't have fail states.
Yeah,
basically.
I guess that's kind of like, as a like Resident Evil and any other horror action game, you're afraid of the shit because it's going to kill you, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, I don't want to die while I'm playing this video game. This game there's none of that except for one moment, which
one sequence. It's more just sort of about the sort of creeping dread of unfolding a tragic and terrifying story.
It's awful. Yeah, an awful story.
Yeah. Of this really true domestic tragedy. So again, if you want to play this game, you can get this game by going to redcandlegames.com. And there you will find their shop page where you can buy this game digitally. And this game is $16.99. It's a DRM-free download. They have a slightly more expensive option if you want to include the original soundtrack, which does have some nice tracks, but I don't think it'd be like fun listening. So I went for just the regular, old version.
Yeah.
And if you purchase the game directly from them, you create an account and you can download it and install it on your Windows PC or Mac, no problem. I thought it was a nice little experience if you're not used to buying games directly from publishers, which I think in the era of Steam, basically nobody is, but you can do it. It's very easy. This is one of the strengths of PCs as a gaming platform, is that if somebody wants to set up their own shop, they can do that. So I totally recommend going and buying this game. I think it's an artistic masterpiece. I think it's a really, really, really good one of these, and I think in some ways it pushes things forward in terms of the horror and also first person narrative exploration / walking simulator genres. And I know I hate just saying walking simulator, so I torture the
there's a lot of additions there. Spoiler or trigger warning for like everything if you're gonna
yes, trigger warnings or just general content warnings, harm to children, lots of blood, gore, etc., visual on screen and implied.
Self-harm.
There's self-harm, big one. Anything else?
Domestic dispute or domestic.
Yeah, or domestic. I believe some domestic abuse, although I don't think it's
abuse.
Explicit.
Dismemberment. I guess you already said blood and gore. Spirit, like satanic. Imagery.
Or just sort of a general attitude of extreme suspicion towards religious figures, especially sort of charlatan mystics, and fortune tellers and whatnot. I think that's pretty much everything. But it's very dark, both in terms of story and in terms of just just grisly visuals occasionally. Although I will say that for a game that features a child, this game does not ever point the camera at an act of violence towards a child.
Right.
It implies a lot of terrible things happening, but in most cases, it shows those things only in metaphor. So I kind of appreciated that. There are moments where you think it's about to put something on screen that you've been dreading, and instead it finds another way to horrify you.
You and I both have young daughters, and I was like, why did we pick this game? This is so bad. I hate this game. I mean, it's great. But I hate this game.
I hear you, Nate. I hear you. So I mentioned where you can pick this game up. We are about to go to our spoiler break, so we'll do our admin now. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. I'm Reagan Kelly. You can find me on the internet on Twitter at Reagan K, RAYGANK. And you can find the show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net. Thank you for joining us here. You can also find us on all the podcast platforms. Leave us a review. We love that. You can also find us on Patreon, of course. Patreon is how people support the show. And we really, really appreciate our patrons. If you'd like to, you can find us at patreon.com/theshortgame. And for even just $1 a month, we give you immediate access to our Discord, which is where we talk about the show. And we'll be chit-chatting about this and IFComp, which we're continuing to cover throughout the rest of the month and into next. If you come in at the $5 level, then you get some stickers. Isn't that exciting?
Wow.
Yes. Well, they are very nice stickers.
They are very nice.
And also, of course, if you are one of those supporters, you get our undying love and affection. We really love our supporters, and especially our $5 a month supporters. And Nate, where can people find you if they wish to?
Hosting a group therapy channel on the Discord, and for anyone who plays this game, and on Twitter at NateSTL.
And listeners, thank you for sticking around. And here we are. This is your spoiler break.
All right. What do you want to talk about? You're the horror guy.
All right.
What do you want to talk about here?
So I think, on one level, I think it'd be nice to talk about some of the more effective or scary bits. But so because you're playing as the main character, Du Fengyu, the father, and because he is the fucked up,
he's the bad guy
of so much of this.
He's by far. I thought it was obvious pretty early, but they obscure it a little bit at the beginning.
They do. They make some efforts, I think, to make you think that the mother is responsible. I think the biggest is that you keep seeing sort of quote unquote ghosts of the mother around. So I keep thinking and they're scary ghosts, So I keep thinking that the mother is going to do something horrible or have something horrible done to her. And neither was the case. The ultimate tragedy is that, that she leaves him, in order to go back to her career, because basically he's ruining their lives by giving all of his money to this charlatan. And the charlatan tells him to do increasingly horrifying things to his daughter, culminating in him believing that her soul is that her symptoms of her anxiety attacks are her soul being somehow trapped, and he has to free it by doing a horrifying ritual that involves submerging her in the bathroom in wine and snake blood and locking her in there for 7 days while he goes and does some horrifying ritual that involves self-mutilation.
Which, nothing, long day at work, you come home, work from home. So stand up from my desk, do a little circle, sit back down at my desk to play my video games. Nothing more that I want to do than a graphic visual of a man ripping his own tongue out with like a hooked tool. Like, I loved that. Now, do you did I guess like, and it's always a balance here for people who are listening to Spoiler Break, whether they play the game or not. Like, I always try to set up a little bit, like, because if you haven't played the game and you're still just listening, we're jumping straight to some insanity here. Like, the entire back half of the game takes place in hell or some version of like this.
Or in Du Fengyu's mind as he's being walked through the ritual by his mentor.
That's what I was going to wonder is, like, do you think he actually did all those self-harm things, or is it all just in his mind? And like,
no, I'm pretty sure he ripped out his own eyeballs, or at least one of them. Pretty sure he did that.
Yeah, because of all the eyeballs everywhere in the game.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that happened. Yeah. And he's like, trying to sacrifice to Siku Guanyin in order to get them to intercede with his daughter or whatever.
Yeah, I guess let's take a step back. So the daughter is, we see medical evidence that she does not have any sort of physical problems, right?
Yeah, we have that whole moment where he gets the thing from the doctor saying that there's nothing physically wrong with her and she should see a psychiatrist.
Right.
And he flips out because presumably sort of mental illness is sort of a taboo issue in 1980s Taiwan.
Right.
And he says, my daughter's not a psycho or whatever.
He says, my daughter is not a lunatic. And then proceeds to get deeper and deeper into this ritual that, like you said, this charlatan, great word, by the way, is, stealing all his money for. But it seems to me like she's just a nervous kid who is forced to do like pageant shows, basically, because her mom was famous.
It feels very appropriate of the era, that you see, though. Most of the video that you see in the game is her performance on some kind of singing competition, like an idol show, and where her singing is being scored by a panel. And ultimately, at least in the instance that we see, like, we hear that she's been doing this a lot and doing well. But then, the video that we see is sort of her, I think, final performance where she gets scored 1 point lower than her competitor and loses the contest. And this is seen as like a serious defeat. And but the video is like, it feels very like really, really, like, I could have honestly believed it was like actually 1980s.
Yeah, television. They did a great job with the crowd shots, the broadcaster, like, everything just felt really real and added. You know what it made me think of, and this is only a like loose comparison, but it made me think of, have you seen Requiem for a Dream?
Years ago, yeah.
Yeah, the like sales call videos that are happening in the middle of it, like that intersperse the whole thing, that like they just set the tone of the movie more so than actually necessarily moving the plot forward or anything like that. It really felt like that to me, where it's like a very specific time and a very specific place and type of video. We talked about it before the spoilers, but I just, like, that whole thing did so much lifting, I think, for the vibe of this game. And I love how, as you unlock pieces, you see further into that episode, or you see like deeper into her run as being like really, really good. Because you see her win like a bunch and you see her doing well, and then you start to see like, oh, she might lose this one, and then ultimately losing. And you also get the sense that the dad is maybe watching these over and over and over as well, probably adding to his overall breakdown, that leads to all of the events of this game.
Yeah, and there you do get a scene. One of the times when it breaks from the perspective of the father, where you see her, where you're in first person perspective of her climbing up onto the stage. It's slightly surrealized, but like you really get a lot of her perspective. Of like why she's doing this. She wants to be like mommy, and she wants to please her father, who clearly like honestly loves her. Like there's a lot of like, it's very obvious that this dad, despite his absolute sickness in the head, really loves his child.
That's one of the degree they go to make it clear that the daughter like loves her dad, and that like he's doing this out of like a sense of love, is like one of the most heartbreaking parts of this whole thing. Is like the daughter's going along with everything because she's like, yeah, it's my daddy. She keeps saying like, I'll do what my daddy wants. It's like, oh God, like this is awful. I hate this.
Yeah. It's so sad because she so wants to please her dad. And there's so many moments in this where it's like, it's obvious that like, if this idiot would take 1 minute to listen to his daughter about what she actually needs. Like there's so many times in the game where like, she says like, oh, I spent time with dad today and we folded the paper flowers, and I didn't have trouble breathing once. If he just spent time with her in ways that were not about putting her on a stage or otherwise making demands of her, where she feels like she has to save the family because she clearly sees her family falling apart around her. If she had 1 minute of like normal interaction with her family, then she's fine. Then these symptoms that she's having go away. But he doesn't see that. And that's sort of the tragedy, the slow motion tragedy of it. Because you see this stuff sort of happen. You don't really see the ultimate, something terrible is coming, but you don't quite see how badly this is going to go until the end. And
he also could have listened to his wife, who was like, I'm famous. I just need to go
make some money. Let me just Your scripts suck, you idiot.
Yeah. She says like, you're clearly not writing what people want anymore, which is harsh but fair for a writer to hear, and she's like, I am a famous actress. There are jobs waiting for me. Let me just go work and it will be fine. And he's like, no, who will take care of the house? And it's like, what do you mean take care of the house?
You're home with your daughter already
all day. You're in a 2-bed. Like, what do you
read
mean?
The poor girl her storybook and fold flowers with her, and everyone will be freaking fine. It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah, and that's the stuff I was talking about. Like, pre-spoiler, the like gender roles and expectations around gender roles that we deal with still in the States, and like it is interesting to see it portrayed in the 80s in Taiwan, and like what that looks like now. I'm interested to hear, but like, he just needed to listen to anyone other than the mentor. The mentor, but that's part of the whole thing. That's what this whole game is.
This person was the whole point of this game, I think, is about how this religious figure who just like lives in an apartment downstairs from them, is preying on everyone around them, including Du Fengyu, who is so susceptible to this, so vulnerable, and his sickness ruins the lives of his entire family. It's just so heartbreaking, and I thought like really like. I mean, there's not much else to say about the story here other than that, like it's. I thought it was very effective. It made a smooth transition for me from horror. It had horrifying imagery right to the end, but especially once you get to the points where you're really realizing, the impending doom and what's actually happening here. It was just a heartbreaking tragedy, and I thought very affecting. So
I love an ending scene with a girl, like a young girl, just sort of frolicking through a graveyard. Love that.
The heartbreaking thing about so it plays this really, I think, nice song at the end. The ending scene is her sort of walking through this sort of stylized afterlife, I think. And the song she's singing is the song that she sang from the show, I believe. It's like Maiden on the Pier or something like that, Lady of the Pier.
Yeah.
And the final line of the song is really haunting, and it's I can't quote it now, so I've forgotten the specific quote, and also, of course, I'm just reading it in subtitles, but it was something like, if we met in another life, I would, I'd still want to be with you, or something like that. And it's this really tragic feel of like, despite everything, it has this sort of final message of, still my daddy.
Well, yeah, she's a little kid. She doesn't know, she doesn't know that all of the stuff he's having her do is like
nightmarish,
awful. She's just doing what her parents or her parent is telling her to do because her mom left, which like, you should have taken the daughter with you when you left, but
probably couldn't.
Maybe couldn't. Maybe
scary
couldn't.
Stuff could. That man was crazy, and maybe she thought she'd come back for him.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Who knows? It was like when she was leaving. I was like, take her with you, please. Take her with you.
And the let's talk about that moment. So there's this whole bit where you're being chased by her, right? And I know you had some trouble with that chase sequence. It's not my favorite part of the game.
Yeah.
We can come back to that, but the thing that's really heartbreaking to me about it is that, like, you there's this whole chase sequence where you are trying to get to an elevator to go downstairs, and downstairs means to Mentor Hui Mentor Hui. Or Hugh, sorry, I'm forgetting the name. But anyway, you're trying to go downstairs to meet up with your mentor. But it's portrayed in the game as this terrifying chase where you're being chased by this creepy, ghostly version of your wife. And you make it to the elevator. Finally, if you get out of that chase sequence, and just as the elevator doors are closing, rather than seeing the horrifying, ghostly version of your wife, she's fallen down. She's reaching out to the elevator, and you see her normal-looking face, and she's just terrified for you, for her daughter. She's just reaching out, trying to reach you before the door closes, and you go down into this, horrifying third act of the game. And what was strange about it was, like, I hadn't 100% put together what was happening until that moment. And then you see her reaching out, and it's like, oh God, something terrible is about to happen. And it wasn't. The terrible thing that was about to happen was not being caught by the spooky ghost. It is whatever we're going down to the lower floor apartment to meet. And I thought it was like super, super effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Super scary.
That chase sequence bullshit though.
Yeah. So I guess, I've been avoiding.
No, let it out, Nate. You had some issues. Let's talk about them.
So you have to run through a series of doors, and I don't. It's seemingly randomized. If it wasn't,
it might be.
I'm just really bad at pattern recognition. And again, so this could all be me because Reagan did not have this problem. So I want to preface this. I don't know. But for me, it took me like 13 tries to get through this chase sequence. And it was driving me crazy because up until this point, you have this like, you're always in control. Everything is like all about imagery and sort of like a slow drive through the game. And I understand that the developers wanted to change the pace. That's cool. That's what they're trying to do with this is like, let's add some more traditional horror and let's add like a heartbeat moment to it. That's cool. But it just drove me crazy because I kept getting caught. And like, I don't know what it was for me where like, if I was making a wrong turn somewhere and I just was not figuring out why I kept making the same wrong turn. But I was trying very hard to like pay attention and figure out what I was supposed to do. And I could just not figure out what I was supposed to do. And I'm almost certain that the time I got through it, I went through considerably less doors than many of my other tries. So I don't know if there's like some sort of route you're supposed to take and I just wasn't figuring out. There's some sort of pattern you're supposed to do. I don't know, but like it almost made me stop playing. And I finally I was like, I don't want to stop playing this game. This is a cool game. I was like, I'm going to stick to it. If I can play through Celeste, I can play through, this. The real thing that was driving me crazy is that there's a before you instigate the chase scene, you like walk down a hallway to a door. Then it starts you at the back of the hallway, and then you walk to the door. That makes you do that every time that you get caught in the chase. And it was like, for some reason, that was just the worst part to me, is that I had to keep doing this like false walk forward before I could instigate the chase. It's like, just let me start at the beginning of the chase and I'll do this 1,000 times until I get it right. But that little slow, because the character walks so slow. And that doesn't normally matter because you're walking around in a tiny little apartment. But in this case, it drove me crazy. So this is my least favorite part of the game. I know what they're trying to do, change the pace, make you have a little bit of fear, because that's been absent from the rest of the game. I don't know. I didn't like it. And
totally valid. And honestly, like, I think the game would have been better without it. Like, keep the chase sequence, but make it like basically a straight line. Like the whole, I think that the mechanically what they're doing, which is, there may be something slightly more than this, but it's a complex series of hallways with multiple doors. And when you go through a door, you may, depending on how you run through and what doors you go through, you may go through that same stretch of hallway again, and any doors that you previously opened are still open. And I think the idea is basically not to double back, to like continue to, but and that's sort of what I do, is I kind of ran through it by feel and just sort of like tried doors and tried to avoid, I avoided going through any doors that I had been through before, and eventually I did it. But it did feel like too long, too complicated. I think this feeling of fear would have been served just as well by 4 or 5 of these hallway rooms with one door each, just make you run through them and kind of get to the elevator.
Because what they do, which I thought was clever, is that when it starts, you're facing forward, and the like ghost wife is forward, and so my initial thought was like, all right, I gotta like deke her, so I like run and I go and I like go left, and then you get this scene where she like, like is like clawing over top, and it's like terrifying. It's like, oh shit. And so that moment where you realize like, oh, I need to turn around and run away, like that was a good moment. I thought, like, you don't see that in games very often, where like normally it's just go forward. This, like, I need to turn around and just straight up run away from this thing. That was enough. I don't think you needed to make it this like complicated pattern or whatever. Like, give me a couple turns, whatever, make it where I can mess it up and get caught. But like, it just went too long. And for me, it really almost became like a roadblock in the game. But
So for listeners, if you run into this, like, you do run a lot faster than the ghost can move. It's just about trying to avoid crossing your own path, and try it a few times and you will do it. But it is fiddly, like, depending on how you go through it. I did it on like the second try, but it's doable. It's just fiddly, and I think it's worth pressing past. So. Last thing I want to talk about was the horrifying afterlife sequence, which I thought was super interesting. Like, there's this whole sequence towards the end where your mentor is via audio is like walking you through a ritual where you've like tied something like a blindfold over your eyes, and you're trying to make it through the afterlife to find the soul of your daughter. Now, God knows what it is presumably in the real world, you're just sitting.
You gotta be just sitting there,
on,
right?
In this person's apartment while she's probably sitting there smoking her cigarette and counting her money. But she's walking you through this process, and you get this like fully rendered image of this like this like bizarre afterlife that's sort of like hell meets like like Hades meets like it's sort of now I am not super familiar with the sort of folk religion stuff that this is based on. I don't really know anything about their afterlives, but the thing that was really cool to me about it was like it does sort of feel like this like walking tour of hell, and that's always cool in games. Like getting this, seeing these like spectral people like suffering in like lava flows or being crushed by rocks or whatever, and the mentor in your ear constantly telling you like they're sinners, ignore them,
don't look at them,
keep
just
going.
keep going, don't look at them. They deserve what they
Right. That was like super, super cool, and culminating in that like weird room where you're, where there's the like massive representation of Siku Guanyin looking down on you as you mutilate yourself. Like
that's wild that this was their that they like basically this was their first game in Unity, because all throughout this game, I was like, man, this game looks so good.
It looks amazing for a small team.
Yeah.
It looks phenomenal. And it's also not like they could like just go on like the Unity asset store and like download a giant fucking snake or like a 1980s apartment full of realistic shit. Like it's all super custom. Like that's why it's so tragic to me. I think like this is a team that came off of like a relatively simple game relatively it came off of a super successful 2D horror game and was like, let's go 3D. And they went 3D, man. They learned to do it all, and they made beautiful 3D models and beautiful textures, and they really did it. And then they got boned. It's like it's like such a beautiful piece of work.
All that said, though, I think my favorite part of the game was the storybook, and maybe because it was the change of pace. But like there's that scene. It's like right in the middle of chapter 2. Or I guess it kind of depends on your own path how you got there. But like during chapter 2, you read a storybook to your daughter, and it like the book opens up and you see these characters, and I actually thought this would be awesome if I actually got to control this like storybook and do like a little platforming. And then that's like literally exactly what it is. Now it's incredibly light. Platforming is probably giving it too much credit, but you are like, you're controlling a little character while there's story narration. And I just love that beat where like the daughter is drawing into the book and altering the story to like make it more cute and make it more fun. There's like, oh, she's so nice. It's probably because it was a change of pace, and it was like the only part of the whole thing that wasn't just a nightmare end to end.
But it is also where you like really get a sense of like what is Meishin like as a child, and she's this incredibly sweet child who just like. She's just a sweet little girl, and you really get her character coming through clearly there. And also that like it's a tender moment between her and her father, because like as she's saying things like, well, why are the deer fighting? Why do you think the deer are fighting? I think it's because they must have bumped into each other. Maybe they can't see very well. They need glasses. Yeah. It's like it's this beautiful little childlike moment, but you also get a sense of like the father's love for his daughter, and it is this like break from the like relentless tragic horror of it, but it's beautiful, and it's beautifully illustrated too. Right.
I thought it was such a clever and cool turn in the middle of the game. I really liked it.
So I think that's all we got to say about Devotion. Check it out. It's a little trickier to get your hands on than a typical game on Steam or what have you, and it's not on consoles, but it's worth seeking out.
Not really much more difficult than Steam. Instead of opening up Steam, you're going to redcandle.com, and it's like it's still very
redcandlegames.com. Redcandle.com is something else. But it's easy enough.
Yeah, it's very simple. So check it out. As I said, not a fan of most of these genres, and I still think this game is worth playing.
Yeah, and I, on the other hand, am a big horror fan, and also a big fan of these sort of exploration-based first-person narrative games. And I thought this was an incredible game. I recommend it wholeheartedly. So, any last thoughts before we tell the listeners to go have a happy Halloween?
I hope that I can that we all sleep well tonight. I guess you played this last week. I played this whole game today. So,
did you? What are you dressing up as for Halloween this year?
I don't have an answer for you, and that's embarrassing.
I don't either. Now that we're parents, it's like I'm not doing that. What are your kids doing for Halloween this year?
So Lola is Eliza Hamilton. And she loves Hamilton, and Ruby is a bunny because she's one. So,
aww,
yeah.
Well, my daughter is going to be Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service because that's one of her favorite movies right now.
Love that.
And because my son is also one and doesn't care, he's going to be Tombo, the little boy from the same movie. So it's
there you go.
It's a pair costume.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well,
on
Halloween.
that on that nice note, happy Halloween, Reagan, and to all of our listeners, happy Halloween.
Spooky.
Ooh.